Instagram model Brisa Dominguez was arrested on July the 5th of 2017 after disrobing and causing a disturbance at the Edge Hotel in Clearwater. The 25-year-old woman had pulled similar stunts in the past, reportedly seeking internet notoriety for getting naked for pictures. However, when people at the hotel called 911 and police officers offered her a towel to cover herself, she became violent and mule-kicked a deputy. She also used the towel they'd given her to strike the officer in the face. Dominguez, who'd amassed 74,000 followers on Instagram through her questionable content, was charged with trespassing, battery on a law enforcement officer, and resisting arrest with violence. She was released from custody after posting a $10,000 bond. Number 11. Bernadette Colotachi and Philip Daly. 47-year-old Bernadette Colotachi and Philip Daly, aged 58, were arrested for lewd and lascivious behavior. Their second such arrest, after being discovered having intercourse on the sidewalk in Fort Myers. The first incident occurred in September of 2018 when a bicycle patrol officer encountered Colotachi performing intimate acts on her boyfriend in the middle of the sidewalk. They both spent 25 days in jail and were ordered to pay a $370 fine, but neither of them seemed to think they'd done anything wrong. The second incident took place in February of 2019. Colotachi and Daly, who were believed to be homeless, were spotted by an off-duty officer near the Edison Festival of Light Junior Parade. Two officers subsequently approached a couple who were lying naked on the sidewalk and noticeably intoxicated. They denied engaging in intercourse, instead claiming they'd been dry humping. The pair were nevertheless taken into police custody once again, adding to the lengthy list of arrests on their respective criminal records. Number 10. Cavan McDaniel. 35-year-old Cavan McDaniel attacked a clerk at a Petro gas station in Marion County on February the 19th of 2018. In subsequent reports, it was described how McDaniel started throwing hot dogs and corn dog sticks at the employee after he was told he couldn't purchase beer. When police arrived at the gas station, McDaniel had already fled the scene. The clerk reportedly suffered a minor injury under her eye during the attack. After reviewing surveillance video, investigators managed to identify and arrest the assailant, charging him with battery. He'd been on probation at the time of the incident and was found to have violated the terms of his parole. Number 9. Madison and Bryant. Leesburg teen Madison and Bryant was arrested for public urination on August the 30th of 2020. Police officers noticed 19-year-old Bryant drunk on the median of US Highway 27 and stopped to aid her. She was initially offered a ride back home, but she refused, informing them she needed to urinate. The officers offered to drive her to a gas station, but the woman squatted in front of the cop car and relieved herself right then and there. She'd reportedly gotten out of her boyfriend's nearby truck following an argument about their relationship. The 22-year-old man was arrested for drunk driving after officers noticed he smelled of alcohol. Bryant's e-cigarette was taken away as she was being placed in the back of the police car, which, according to her, caused her great anxiety. She attempted to get it back by offering intimate favors to one of the deputies, who declined her offer. Bryant ended up facing charges of disorderly intoxication and offering a bribe to a public servant. Number 8. Megan Barnes. In March of 2010, Cajou Key resident Megan Barnes got into a car accident because she was distracted while attempting to shave her bikini area. The 37-year-old woman's ex-husband was reportedly sitting in the passenger seat, steering the vehicle as she proceeded with her self-grooming. Barnes consequently drove right into a pickup truck, but instead of stopping, continued down the road for another half mile. When police subsequently tracked Barnes down and arrested her, they discovered she'd been driving with a suspended license. The day before the collision, she'd reportedly been convicted of driving under the influence in relation to an entirely separate incident. Following the accident, Barnes was charged with reckless driving and leaving the scene of a crash, as well as driving without insurance and with a revoked license. She attempted to justify her actions, revealing she was on her way to visit her boyfriend and wanted to be ready by the time she arrived. Number 7. Shelby Svenson. Shelby Svenson murdered his wife, 21-year-old Jamie Ivancic, in 2018. However, it would take an entire year, as well as the death of Ivancic's family, for Tarpon Springs authorities to discover the crime. On New Year's Eve 2019, Svenson viciously beat his wife's father, Richard, aged 71, her mother, Laura, aged 59, and her older brother, Nicholas, to death. The 3 family dogs, Buddy, Boomer, and Bailey, were also killed. Throughout the previous year, Ivanchit's family members had been unable to meet her face-to-face, receiving only sporadic text messages from her phone. However, days after Svenson slaughtered his wife's family, police determined the text had actually been sent by him in an attempt to cover up the first murder. The man was arrested on January 3rd of 2019 just outside Cleveland, Ohio. He'd been attempted to flee with his 2 young children. Svenson confessed to all 4 murders and told officers where they could discover his wife's remains. She'd reportedly been buried at the family's house in Port Richey. Ivanchit's sister told investigators she had decided to leave Svenson shortly before her disappearance. While it's unclear why he decided to kill his former family-in-law a year after murdering his wife, police noted that jewelry and heirlooms were stolen from the house as well as several video games. As of March of 2023, Svenson's trial had yet to begin, but the prosecution had stated their intention to seek the death penalty. Number 6. Jessie Pack. Jessie Pack, a 40-year-old resident of the city of Bunnell, was taken into police custody on January 13th of 2019. The man had reportedly been wanted for kidnapping and aggravated assault after he'd picked up a woman in Daytona Beach, took her to the woods to do drugs, then refused to take her home. The victim got into a scuffle with Pack that allowed her to escape from his car, at which point he drove off. Investigators were given Pack's license plate number by the woman he'd kidnapped, and they were thus able to track his vehicle to his mother's home in Flagler County. A female occupant of the house refused to let responding officers inside. A law enforcement impounded the man's car. He dialed 911 from inside the house and was very agitated and hostile. According to police records, eventually officers gained access to the residence where they found Pack hiding in a fetal position in a small dresser. He'd written a note for the police which read, "I'm not here." The letter also stated he knew there was a warrant for his arrest, but that he would be turning himself into Volusia Branch Jail once he finished the job. New charges were subsequently added to Pack's list of alleged offenses, including resisting arrest. Number 5. Ryan Nyhart. On January 28th of 2019, an aspiring YouTuber by the name of Ryan Nyhart was sentenced to 10 days in jail for attacking a partially blind and disabled man wearing a minion suit in Daytona Beach. During the previous summer, Nyhart, who was 26 at the time, approached the victim, 41-year-old Jamie Rome, and asked if he wanted to wrestle. Rome said no, but the wannabe internet star nevertheless picked him up and twirled him around several times. Nyhart subsequently leaned the costumed man against a tree and kicked him in the groin and face, then tackled him to the ground. The entire incident was captured on Nyhart's cell phone as well as surveillance cameras. At the time, the young man had 1,875 followers on Instagram and only 48 subscribers to his YouTube channel. He'd reportedly launched the attack as a prank, thinking it would attract a lot of attention to his channel and social media profiles. Nyhart decided to enter an open plea to battery and criminal mischief to avoid more serious charges. As part of an open plea, a defendant leaves their punishment to the court's discretion. Nyhart was ultimately sentenced to 10 days in jail and a year of probation. He was also ordered to enroll in a therapy program. Number 4. Zephan Xaver. 21-year-old Zephan Xaver stormed into a SunTrust bank in Sebring and fatally shot 5 women on January 23rd of 2019. Among the victims were bank tellers Marisol Lopez and Anna Pignon Williams, aged 55 and 38 respectively, as well as a 65-year-old customer named Cynthia Watson. The other 2 victims weren't identified to the public at the request of their families. Xaver was accused of forcing all 5 women to lay on the floor at gunpoint. He then proceeded to shoot them execution style. Alex Gerlach, Xaver's former girlfriend, told investigators she'd been trying to warn them that he would eventually do something violent for years, but no one had taken her seriously. She'd reportedly met him at a psychiatric hospital in Indiana 6 years earlier and explained he had a fascination with death. According to local authorities, there were no indications that Xaver had planned to rob the bank. Rather, he'd entered the establishment with the sole intention to kill. 6 minutes after the shooting, Xaver called 911 and told the operator he'd murdered 5 people. He refused to surrender himself, however, and subsequently became embroiled in a standoff with the police, who attempted to negotiate with him. A SWAT team eventually managed to subdue Xaver, and he was taken into custody. Although his trial was originally slated to start in 2022, it was later rescheduled for January of 2024. Number 3. Nicole Cardona. On September the 15th of 2022, a task force consisting of Florida's Miami-Dade and Miami Beach police departments arrested Nicole Cardona for selling fraudulent paperwork that allowed drivers to get disability parking permits. The 26-year-old was charged with forgery, criminal use of a public record, organized scheme to defraud, and falsifying official statements. Miami-Dade State Attorney Catherine Fernandez-Rundle explained how Cardona needed to falsify doctors' signatures to go through with the scheme, which she labeled a criminal act that impacts the daily lives of numerous residents living in the city. Police first uncovered the fraud when they noticed an unauthorized motorist parking in a space reserved for disabled individuals. When the agent spoke with the driver, they admitted to paying Cardona, who was recommended to him by a co-worker, $150 for the forged paperwork. After two different undercover police officers purchased fraudulent licenses from Cardona, they were able to confirm that the signatures had been written by the same person. The doctors, whose signatures were forged, denied having ever dealt with the documents themselves. Number 2. Pembroke Pines pothole. On January the 29th of 2019, a public worker responded to a complaint about a pothole on a roadway in Pembroke Pines. He subsequently discovered an underground passageway leading directly to a bank. The man immediately contacted the authorities, leading to the FBI launching an investigation. The man-made tunnel reportedly led to a Chase Bank 50 yards from the pothole, which had caved in. The entrance led to a nearby wooded area where boots, tools, and a gas generator were found. According to the FBI, it must have taken months for the elaborate tunnel to be created. Officials were confused about its size, which was reported as being no bigger than 3 feet in diameter. Before we show you the last listing, we have part 1 lined up right after it in case you missed that when we released it a few weeks ago. Number 1. Julie Hoover. 39-year-old teacher Julie Hoover from the city of Perry got in trouble with the law after engaging in inappropriate behavior with a student. According to official reports on the matter, Hoover was caught twerking with the male student and pressuring him to drink during prom. In June of 2022, she'd been accused of sending explicit messages to an 18-year-old senior, but was then arrested for a second time on September the 6th. Hoover was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor and engaging in lewd conduct with a student. The incident had allegedly taken place on April the 8th and had made the student and several other prom attendees very uncomfortable. It wasn't immediately made clear why law enforcement wasn't notified of the situation earlier. Number 13. Joshua James. 24-year-old Joshua James from the town of Jupiter pleaded guilty to misdemeanor assault and unlawful possession of an alligator on May the 31st of 2016 after throwing the animal into a Wendy's drive-through window. James apologized for the stunt, saying that at the time he believed it would be an amusing joke. The cashier on duty that day testified in court, telling the judge she'd escaped the restaurant through the window in a wild panic. She also revealed the incident had caused her to consider quitting. James was ultimately sentenced to 75 hours of community service and would remain on parole for a year. The judge also ordered him to pay a $1,200 fine, undergo a mental health evaluation, as well as to stay away from any Wendy's franchise and animals other than his family's dog.
Wow, I'm really in trouble for this. I think my pranking days are over.
Number 12. Matthew Latham. 22-year-old Matthew Latham was arrested in Pasco County in January of 2021 for fraudulently using the 911 system and possession of an illicit substance. Latham, who sported a tattoo of the state of Florida in the middle of his forehead, called the emergency line 4 times, screaming at the dispatcher that he needed a ride home. During one of the calls, he even hung up, claiming to have dialed the wrong number. The deputy that showed up at the scene offered to call him a taxi, but Latham refused, stating he didn't have any money. He was arrested, then released 3 days later. The following year, Latham once again got into trouble with the law when he attacked his friend with a razor blade, slashing his neck. The unidentified victim's wound needed to be stapled shut, and he was treated at the hospital for several other injuries as well. Even though Latham claimed he'd been acting in self-defense, he was charged with aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. Number 11. James Muchaccio. On December the 26th of 2018, James Muchaccio drove his Ferrari into the intracoastal waterway in Palm Beach. He initially parked his car on the dock, but police officers then approached him to tell him he would have to move it. Instead of driving away, Muchaccio accelerated sharply and consequently landed directly into the water. The entire incident was caught by a dash camera when questioned by police. The man claimed to have driven into the waterway because Jesus told him to do it. He managed to make his way out of the Ferrari before it sank, at which point he was taken back to shore by two fishermen. Throughout his conversation with law enforcement, Muchaccio kept ranting, adding that money would become irrelevant in 2 days' time. Number 10. Carlos Rodriguez. 31-year-old Carlos Rodriguez, a Florida man with a notably deformed skull, was arrested for arson and attempted murder on October the 17th of 2016. Firefighters and state troopers arrived at Rodriguez's duplex after a concerned witness called 911 regarding a fire. After the blaze was handled, investigators discovered that Rodriguez had intentionally poured igniting fuel on his mattress in order to start the fire. Detectives considered the man's actions, at least in part, as an attempt against his neighbors' lives. It was the second time Rodriguez made headlines in the state of Florida. Back in 2012, he reportedly crashed his car into a telephone pole, severely injuring his head. He underwent life-saving surgery, but doctors needed to remove a portion of his skull and brain in order to stabilize him, leading to the distinct shape of his head. Number 9. Brandy Lerma. 31-year-old Brandy Lerma, a resident of West Palm Beach, was arrested for driving erratically with an unrestrained minor in the back seat on August the 12th of 2017. Police were alerted to the reckless driver by a concerned witness. Officers promptly pulled Lerma over, at which point they noticed that she seemed intoxicated and looked disheveled and dirty. She openly admitted to drinking as well as taking prescription drugs before getting behind the wheel. A small child was reportedly sitting in the back without a seatbelt. Lerma was thus arrested and charged with child neglect and DUI. Number 8. Gardenia McCulloch. Gardenia McCulloch, a 23-year-old Florida resident, was arrested on March the 7th of 2019 for stealing an SUV from an Ace rent-a-car. She was taken into police custody at a hotel only a mile away from the business's parking lot. When police arrived at the scene, she attempted to hide in one of the rooms but was eventually arrested. She reportedly kept insisting she'd only wanted to rent a vehicle, but when she was told they were overbooked, demons commanded her to steal one. McCulloch underwent a psychiatric evaluation at the request of the court and was found incompetent to stand trial. Number 7. Tessa B Lilly. On November the 7th of 2019, Tessa B Lilly was arrested for bringing illicit substances into the Kim C. Hammond Justice Center in Flagler County. When the 25-year-old woman tried to walk through the metal detector, Deputy Vince Schreider noticed she was carrying a suspicious bag in her pocket. Lilly told Schreider it was makeup, but when the substance, which weighed 1.44 grams, was tested, it was positively identified as an illegal stimulant. She was arrested at the scene and held on a $30,000 bond. Number 6. Lisa Ann Sloan. Lisa Ann Sloan, aged 56, was arrested on July the 19th of 2022 after she tried to sell teddy bears while armed with a pitchfork and whip outside a Publix grocery store in Clermont. Authorities were alerted to a woman waving a pitchfork around and brandishing a whip menacingly. Sloan also reportedly damaged a parked minivan. When policemen approached her, she pointed the whip at them and refused to leave. As she was subsequently being arrested, Sloan began screaming, "God is great!" repeatedly, and warned the officers she felt no pain because God was in control. Law enforcement noted the woman was heavily intoxicated at the time. Sloan was charged with aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in the aftermath of her public outburst. Number 5. Brian Keith Harrington. On February the 4th of 2019, Brian Keith Harrington went on a rampage, triggered by his sister's boyfriend moving his cigars. The 23-year-old man became violent after he couldn't find his box of cigars and began screaming at his pregnant sister, as well as others, at the Pinellas Park residence. He grabbed everything he could get a hold of, including a ketchup container, juice bottle, and other food packages, which he then started throwing at his sister. When police were called to the scene, Harrington shifted his anger towards the responding officer, threatening to kill him and even attempting to bite his thumb. He was arrested and charged with battery, threatening, and resisting arrest. He was released after posting his $10,150 bail. Number 4. Benjamin Austin Paige. On May the 17th of 2020, Benjamin Austin Paige was charged with second-degree murder after gunning down his partner in Lehigh Acres. According to Sheriff Carmine Marcino, 22-year-old Paige and the victim, Terrence Brown, had been in a violent argument after the latter said he wouldn't delete explicit pictures that featured the two of them. During the course of the verbal altercation, Paige pulled out a gun and fired it several times in Brown's direction. The victim was ultimately declared dead at the scene by responding emergency crews. Following his arrest, Paige was held in jail on a $2 million bond. The young man had reportedly been released from prison earlier that year in connection with an unrelated offense, so a count of possession of a firearm by a convicted felon was added to his list of charges. On April the 30th of 2022, he was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years behind bars. Number 3. Katie Jade Gates. 19-year-old Katie Jade Gates got into trouble with the law on September the 12th of 2019 when she threatened her grandfather with a knife for refusing to give her tomatoes while they were having dinner at their Callahan residence. When police arrived at the home, Gates admitted to throwing items at her grandparents, but denied making any threats and stated she'd only been holding the knife because she was eating. Eyewitness testimony contradicted her statements, however. Other members of the family told police the young woman had begun shouting and behaving disrespectfully towards her grandparents, mother, and another adult present at the scene, identified as Jose Luis Valdez Monteo. After Gates lost her temper, she threw a water bottle and a pack of cigarettes at her relatives before eventually grabbing a knife. According to the family, the teen began chasing her grandfather around the house, screaming about how she was going to stab him in the face. Gates was arrested and charged with aggravated battery on a person over the age of 65 and aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. She was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from her grandfather as well as her mother. 2 weeks prior to the assault, Gates had been arrested for a traffic violation, for which she was issued a small fine. Number 2. Michael Gould. On November the 28th of 2018, Michael Gould was admitted to the hospital in Ocala with gunshot wounds, claiming to have been shot by a robber. Police were able to determine the wounds had been self-inflicted after discovering shell casings in his car, and also learned that he was in possession of a firearm that matched his injuries. Since he'd been convicted of 5 prior felonies, 37-year-old Gould wasn't legally permitted to own the weapon. When he was interviewed a second time, the man admitted to accidentally shooting himself when he was drunk. He was sentenced to 30 months in prison. Number 1. Jacob Alexander Zane Heisel. When 26-year-old Jacob Alexander Zane Heisel, who had a warrant out for his arrest, was stopped by the police one day, he decided to give the officers his brother's name, only to discover that he was wanted by the authorities as well. The incident occurred on July the 21st of 2019, while Heisel was walking down US 41 in Bradenton. The young man initially told law enforcement he wasn't carrying his ID before giving the troopers his 23-year-old brother's name, Nathan, believing it would get him out of trouble. Heisel was then taken into custody on his sibling's warrant, but when police fingerprinted him, they discovered his true identity. Additional charges of false identification to law enforcement were added to his existing list of offenses, which already included dealing stolen property and possession of a forged instrument. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be the victim in a classic Florida man news story, or get roasted online for a wardrobe malfunction at your wedding? Let us know in the comments section below.